Mission.
Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the gun guy. This is a live stream with Sam Paredes from Gun Owners of California. We're going to address the issues with California Department of Justice confiscating firearms. Sam's got some news for us. I have some news for you since the last video that I posted about this, I think on the 14th of February. I'm going to bring Sam on here just as an introduction. I'm going to let you know and let Sam know what I've discovered. All right, well, look, go back to that thing again. There's a video. There is a link in the description of this podcast, by the way, or this live stream, by the way, for that video. And you can go back and look at it if you're curious about what I'm talking about. Back on the 14th, I think, is when I posted it. On the 13th, I believe, is the day that four California Department of Justice officers showed up at a gentleman's house in San Diego County. If I remember correctly, he was in the city of Santee, which is in the eastern part of the county. They showed up to his house because he had attempted to register 2 AR pistols and apparently made some mistakes along the way. So they ended up confiscating them. Now, when they did so, he took his phone out and he shot video of the majority of the encounter. I posted that entire video that he shot, just the way he shot it, when he posted it on Reddit, and I copied it and straightened it out because it was kind of sideways, and I posted it along with some comments on GunGuyTV. I think it's gotten about 250,000 views at this point, so I'm very encouraged by that because that means people are actually looking at it, and they're getting the information that they need from that. Since I posted that now, I've received a number of phone calls from law enforcement officers as well as some emails, and I've spoken to a couple of agents with the Department of Justice who shall remain nameless. I'm a little concerned about doing too much of that because I don't want to cause them trouble at work. What I'm being told, Sam, is that there is, for lack of a better word, there's a lot of contention going on within the firearms division of the California Department of Justice between the agents who know this is wrong and do not want to be doing this, and the management who is forcing them to do it at the threat of losing their jobs. In fact, I was told by one gentleman I spoke to that they had right before going out and contacting this guy in Santee and taking his pistols, they had about a 4-hour heated meeting, and that got to the point that, to use his words, was right on the ragged edge of insubordination, where they refused to go do it. What they wanted to do was send the guy a letter and say, you made this mistake and this mistake. Why don't you fix your mistakes and then let us know it's fixed, and then we'll come take a look at it. Or you can bring it in, we'll look at it and make sure it's right. Instead, management sent them out there to confiscate the guns and arrest the guy, which they apparently refused to do. They confiscated the guns, but they refused to arrest him because they knew it was wrong. In fact, I loved it when he said to them, you guys know this is wrong, right? If you go back and look at that video and you look at those officers, I mean, they all look like they're all kind of sheepish looking. None of them really want to be there. It's kind of obvious. Now, I'm also aware of a couple of other similar events that have occurred. In one case, an elderly gentleman attempted to register a rifle, which was banned by name and model under the previous name model Roberti Roos ban from years ago. I guess this guy's in his 80s. He had no idea, so he was just trying to obey the law, and so he tried to register it. Well, they had to go collect the gun because it had been banned for quite some years and was illegal. Apparently, management wanted them to arrest this 80-some-odd-year-old man for making a procedural mistake. I'm aware of a Navy SEAL who got his rifle confiscated because of a procedural mistake. Here's the problems that these agents have with this. Now, I have additional problems with it. Then I'm going to let you go, Sam, and tell me what's going on with you and what you know. But there are many problems that I have with it. But when I'm talking to these agents, the problems they have with it is not necessarily enforcing the law of the state, because the law of the state is the law of the state. They may not like them or agree with them, and as I've spoken to them, the answer is no, they don't like them, and no, they don't agree with them. And yes, they're racing home to their own houses and reconfiguring everything they own so that their own agents don't come contact them, and they're kind of afraid of it as well. The issue is there's no recourse. There's no due process. It's a violation of our due process rights. It's a violation of, it's a violation of a lot of different rights. But in addition, there's just no common sense to it. If it's a procedural mistake and this person, by virtue of trying to register and trying to do the right thing, is trying to do the right thing, let's give them a chance to correct it. And if there's something wrong with the gun, they took pictures and they sent it in, and we said, oh, this item's wrong. Okay, well, here's a letter. This item's wrong. You got to do this with this item and then send us new pictures. Problem solved. The agents would like to be out chasing actual criminals. One agent said to me, this law has done nothing but make criminals out of law-abiding people, and now the state wants them to arrest each and every one of them. So I'm going to let you know, if you're a gun owner and you're in the state of California, the management and politicians in the state of California, if you make the smallest little procedural mistake with your firearm, are going to push to have you arrested and prosecuted, even though the agents don't want to do it. The agents thus far have held their ground and in many cases have not made the arrest. They've confiscated the guns without making the arrest. So with that in mind, Sam and I talked on the phone. I told him all of this. Now I've given you the background. And Sam had a lot to say about it. So, Sam, I'm going to give you the floor, brother, and get out of your way. What have you heard about this and in previous times as well?
Since the Armed Prohibited Persons System program came online, this is a program at the Department of Justice where they take all of the people that have been convicted of a disqualifying crime, disqualifying meaning that they no longer have the right to own or possess or keep guns in the state of California, and they bounce it against the records that we know as the dealer record of sales, the purchases and possessors of firearms. A lot of people have purchased legally firearms of all types, and then they do something later on and they become disqualified. And by law, they're supposed to divest themselves of those firearms, either get them out of the state, get them out of their possession and ownership, sell them to a dealer, but basically get them so where they have no control over them at all. That's the law. And what ostensibly this program was designed to go after those people who have been convicted of crimes and who have not divested themselves of guns. Now, mind you, if you've been convicted of a crime like a felony, you should be in jail. And you shouldn't have access to firearms. But the fact of the matter is a lot of the people that are on this apps list are they're not incarcerated. So what the Department of Justice does is they bounce these two lists together and say, oh, Joe Blow, who lives in X city or county in the state of California, has a gun registered to them, and we don't know what the disposition of that gun is. And it's illegal for them to be in possession of guns and ammunition. So we're going to go ahead and send the team over to find out what the disposition of that gun is. Now, mind you, they don't have a search warrant. There is no judge under these circumstances who would issue a search warrant because the Department of Justice has no indication. They've done no research to find out if these people have actually divested themselves of the firearms. They haven't called them. They haven't written to them and said, hey, if you're in possession of these firearms, you're in violation of the law and you will be prosecuted. But if you have disposed of these firearms in a legal manner, why don't you let us know and we'll just check you off the list. We'll send somebody to check to make sure everything's all right. And you're good to go. Instead, they send the DOJ law enforcement team in all of their law enforcement regalia with machine guns and black SUVs and lights and sirens going. And they usually do it sometime after dinner in the evening when the lights make quite a spectacle in the neighborhood and the sirens are waking everybody up and every kid in the street. And they go and they knock on the door and say, hey, would you please let us in so we can inspect your firearms? And if the people say no, then they say, oh, so you're going to make us go pull paper. You're going to make us go and get a search warrant. Well, we will be here at your door with the lights going on and the sirens going on until we come back with paper. They don't tell them that the chances of them getting a search warrant are between slim and none. But at that point, any good neighbor will not want this spectacle going on in with their neighbors and all of that, especially if they have complied with the law. So they invite the agents in, and at that point, it's no holds barred. They search for guns and all kinds of things, and it causes all kinds of problems. Now, there are a lot of law enforcement officers since the beginning. Oh, and by the way, there are, at this point, last number I heard, there are over 9,000 cases where they believe that people who shouldn't have firearms have them registered in their name. That backlog has been from over 20,000 and over the years. And then they were given, the Department of Justice was given $24 million to wipe out the backlog on this. And they said, oh, we can do it. We can do it right away. We can do it in a year. They testified to this point. Well, they failed miserably. Every year there are more names that are added to this database, and they just cannot keep up with it. Ostensibly, that money was supposed to go to hire agents to run the investigations on this program in order to clear the list. Well, we have been told by some folks who were agents there, who were hired and trained. Unfortunately, they're hired in a temporary position. This is not a full-time position. So when they come and then they do the job and they realize, this isn't a very nice job to do. This isn't fighting crime. This is putting ourselves in danger, putting the people we come to investigate in danger. This isn't going after criminals. And the way we're doing this is all wrong. And many times we come and knock on these doors and they tell us, oh, we divested ourselves of those firearms a long time ago. So it was a wasted set of resources that they expended to go in and try to investigate these people instead of picking up the phone or dropping a letter in the mail asking them for disposition of the firearms. And so the agents say, this isn't law enforcement. They've been trained, they've been certified. So they go to other law enforcement agencies. They leave service. So they're constantly having vacancies in this program. And you have this turnover of officers who are hired and trained. And when they do the job, they say, this is bogus. And so they go to find a real law enforcement job doing something else in the state of California, either with the highway patrol or even prison guards or the sheriffs or police departments or some other aspect of law enforcement within the state. But this has been an ongoing problem that the Department of Justice has tried to keep secret for a long time. But the fact of the matter is that they have never filled all of the vacancies to hire all of the investigators that they said they needed to clear this list. And it's because of what you're talking about. Management asking the street investigators, the street cops, to do things that are unreasonable and just plain flat out unfair. Going after people that are trying to comply with the law. And this is an important aspect of this, Joel. These people are getting in trouble because the Department of Justice has made it almost impossible for people to understand what the laws are. They released the regulations that govern these laws days before holidays, major holidays. They make it so that it's not possible for your average citizen to understand these laws. And when they try to comply, they find themselves in trouble because they made some sort of a mistake. I mean, that's why you need something like this, California gun laws, a guide to state and federal firearms regulations, that is this thick in order to stay out of trouble. And unfortunately, you have to have a good understanding of a lot of these laws or hire an attorney in order to stay out of trouble. When asked, what good is registration? I'm telling you, ma'am, we've been saying it all along. Registration does not reduce crime. It does not solve crime. All it does is gives government an opportunity to confiscate guns. So we need to do whatever we can to legally avoid these registration procedures as much as possible in order to stay on the right side of the law.
Sam, there's a few people have asked some questions. If you mind, I'm going to throw those at you real quick. I'm kind of looking through the chats here. And forgive me, if I don't find your question, it's just because there's a bazillion of them. I'm going to try to scan through them. If I can get them all, we'll get through them real quick. And then if you have a question, feel free to post it for Sam. If you post a super chat, obviously it rises to the top. I'm not trying to get money out of you. I'm just letting you know how it works, and I'm more likely to see those. But I will try to find them all regardless of that.
Let's see. One question which is not related to this directly, but how will the real ID or lack of same affect handgun purchases or firearms purchases in the future?
Well, you're going to need a real ID in order to purchase firearms through a dealer or do private party transfers. They're moving to either that, or you have multiple other acceptable forms of identification, like a passport and some other government issued identification. There's concern about real ID. You can protect yourself with real ID. The biggest thing is that, you know, the information on those chips can be remotely accessed through passive receivers just by people walking by, and they can gain the information that's on those receivers. And people are going to say, how do you know? Well, when the Real ID law was sponsored in the state of California, we actually opposed it, and we worked with the ACLU. And actually, we hired this young kid from the Bay Area and gave him, he spent like $41 on the internet to build a little black box. And then he walked through the halls of the legislature. And just in walking through the halls, he came back and put the black box on, hooked it up to a computer. This was a smart kid, but, you know, not the smartest of them by any means. But he was bright. And then he turned it on, and he had captured the private gate codes for many people who live in gated communities. He captured information that was on credit cards. Wow. It was scrambled. He also captured the gate code for the private entrance to the legislature down in the state garage, the controlled garage. Mentioned it to the state police. They were quite concerned about that. The way to protect against the Real ID access to your information on the chip is to store your Real ID in a Mylar slip when you put it in your wallet. That way it prevents it from being, that's all you have to do to prevent the information from being garnered. But if you don't mind putting up with the extra hoops, there's always a way around the Real ID, and that's by having other forms of acceptable government identification in order to purchase guns. But you're right. It's going to be a pain in the butt if you don't have a Real ID in the future to buy guns at a dealer.
Now, Sam, this is not a question as much as it's a comment from Man for All Seasons is the ID here. He says, all of these nefarious anti-Second Amendment laws, whether declaring a certain type of equipment illegal, red flag laws et al., are likely designed to overwhelm but to invite some sort of backdoor confiscation. What are your thoughts on that? Man,
we've been saying it for a very long time. Back in 1989, we were saying that assault weapons registration was all about confiscation. And people said, oh, they're never going to confiscate guns in America or here in California. Right after those laws were sponsored under Attorney General Dan Lundgren, they went out and confiscated, legally purchased guns that they were told by the Department of Justice were legal for them to purchase. They were forced to either destroy them, turn them in, or they were confiscated. So confiscating in the state of California has already happened, is continuing to happen, and it's based on these registration laws, which have been proven through studies nationwide not to have any sort of impact on reducing crime or anything. These registration programs serve only as a vehicle for government to eventually take guns away. And people who say we're nuts, we're paranoid, hey, it's happening now. That is a fact. Sit on that and twist on it, because that's the fact.
Well, I mean, we've seen it happen time and time again. I think that's the other thing. It's not as if we're making this stuff out of whole cloth. We've actually seen it a number of times. All right, here's another one from Larry Bevins. Are those of us who have California concealed carry permits somehow more closely watched than others?
CCW holders, they get the top drawer green stamp premium background check conducted on them when they initially apply and reapply for their CCWs. You get the highest level background check that is conducted by the state of California. That background check is not, they don't redo it midstream or anything like that. Once you're issued a CCW, the only thing that happens is that the issuing agency has your information. And if you do something dumb and break some sort of a law, they're going to know about it. But they don't have any special monitoring that's going on. And if they did, they wouldn't admit it, because that monitoring would show them that the CCW holders are the most law-abiding people in the state of California, and they don't particularly want people to know that. They don't want that narrative to get out there. So we're not treated very differently than anyone else, except for the initial screening and the background check, which is an intensive background check.
The other thing, one of the other ones that's come up is Sergeant Daggs, I think is how he says it, came up with this statement. And I've heard this a lot, Sam. I'm not sure if I agree with it based upon what's happened in the past here in California with such protests. But he writes, I bet if you took 4,000 armed people to Sacramento to protest at the Capitol, a lot of stuff would change. I'm curious what your response to that is. I think things would change, but not necessarily for the better.
Well, the Black Panthers tried that, and things changed for the worse. They actually came in and brought loaded ARs and M1 carbines and M1 Garands and paraded in the halls of the legislature. That was back in the time when the public was actually allowed to be on the floor of the legislature, and that didn't work. Now we have laws that make it illegal for anybody, including CCW holders, to have their guns anywhere on state park grounds. And if there was going to be a armed protest, I can pretty well guess that the Department of Justice will have an army of California Highway Patrol officers there to arrest as many protesters as possible. And you know what? We are the law-abiding. We are not the lawbreakers. We have a responsibility to fight to correct bad laws. Unfortunately, Joel, a lot of our folks, a lot of your listeners who are good, strong patriots are only now waking up and deciding to do something to fight. Well, you can't go from nothing to launching rockets in one step. There's a whole lot of political action and activity that we have to be involved in. We've got some great lawsuits that are in the pipeline right now that will probably come back. I am very confident will come back and resolve all of these issues for us without us having to go to guns. By going to the courts, we can get all of these issues resolved, and all of the concerns that your callers and writers and listeners are voicing will be dealt with in a very positive way. But we need the support of people so that we can have the right attorneys filing the right briefs, going before the court that we now know is pro-Second Amendment, and I mean the United States Supreme Court.
Sam, there's a number of comments here that all kind of point to the same thing, and there's about 3 or 4 that ask about CCWs. We can address that in a second. There's a number that are pointing out something which I think is unfortunately painfully obvious, and that is if DOJ continues going down this path, if California politicians keep pushing these agents to do this, sooner or later, one of these agents is going to get hurt or killed, and sooner or later, DOJ agents are going to kill a law-abiding citizen. And that's just my opinion. I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are, because I'm seeing people come up with the same opinion, and I agree with them.
Yeah, it's inevitable that as long as the Department of Justice, and the Attorney General, Xavier Becerra, continues to promote this jackbooted approach to dealing with procedural laws, not acts of criminal acts or violent acts or anything like that, but either errors in procedure or perceived errors in procedural laws and regulations, somebody is going to get hurt. A law-abiding citizen who tries to exercise their rights will be hurt, or vice versa. A law enforcement officer who is trying to enforce an unconstitutional law is going to get hurt, and that does not need to happen. The leaders at the Department of Justice and this government are pushing us toward that situation. They're called accidents, and accidents happen the more you continue to do an activity that has the potential for an accident, and that's what's going to happen, Joel. And the tragedy will be on their doorstep, not ours.
One of the things I think it's kind of interesting is the number of, obviously a lot of folks watch my channel who are not from California. And I'm seeing these questions a lot. I just saw another one. What registration are you guys talking about? Because they're from a state where they don't register stuff or they don't demand registration. So perhaps in some abbreviated form, you can explain for these folks who are not in California what we're talking about when we're talking about the fact that, like this guy with the AR pistols tried to register them, and the elderly gentleman tried to register his rifle, and the SEAL tried to register his rifle. Why anybody's confiscating a weapon from a Navy SEAL escapes me, but anyway, if you can just explain that briefly, that would be super helpful.
Sure. I don't want to go through all of this, which is what you will need in order to understand all of the laws in California and how they affect law-abiding citizens. In California, we have this. We have the federal firearms registration procedure, and that's by filling out the 4473 form, which is maintained at the dealership until the dealer closes down, and then they ship it to a storage facility in Florida where they maintain those records. There is no electronic. There's not supposed to be any sort of an electronic collection of registration information at FBI or anywhere else. The 4473 is it. But here in the state of California, we have the dealer record of sales program, where every time that a firearm is transacted, transferred, sold, given away, a new record, a state registration record is maintained, and that gun is attached to that particular person at that particular address, and it's kept in the automated firearm system, AFIS, which is our California database. And then on top of that database, we have an assault weapons database where everybody who chose to register what was considered and defined as a California assault weapon, they added those weapons to an additional database. So we're database crazy here in the state of California, and those are all registration systems, that are in place, unlike most other states in pre-America.
So if you're not from California or you live in another state and you don't understand this, don't feel bad. We're in California. We don't understand it either a lot of the time. That's why that book is that stinking thick. And oh, by the way, that book is updated every year, and every year it gets thicker. So that's the kind of stuff that we have to deal with in states like California, New York, New Jersey, and these very restrictive states. There's a couple other comments I would like to have you respond to, but just so that you understand, we do know the difference. People think in California we're too foolish or stupid, or we live in a bubble and we don't understand what it's like in other states. I just got back from a hunting trip in Arizona. We were outside of Florence, Arizona, hunting javelina. We got done one evening after dark. We started coming back because we were hanging around. The little restaurant closed at 9. We didn't have time to change before we went to the restaurant, so we just went. So we walk in the restaurant. We're all carrying sidearms. Nobody bats an eye. We sit down. We have dinner. That's the way the United States is. I was texting my wife that night, and I said, I'm back in America again, where you can walk in a place with a sidearm and nobody cares. We get it. We understand. But we're here in California fighting the fight, which brings up one of the questions or one of the comments in here. Sam, there have been several comments I was looking at a minute ago that have popped up and said, well, California, what happens in California takes over and other states. That's the argument for not moving, isn't it?
Yeah. We always argue that what happens here in California, we either affect or infect other states. And we've been doing a pretty good job of infecting. You look at states like Nevada, who people would think is one of the states of the old West where freedom reigns and people are left alone from the government. In fact, they're going absolutely the wrong way on guns. They've had a whole slew of anti-gun laws that were sponsored, including one law that was introduced, heard, signed by the government, and put into law in a matter of in less than a week. In less than a week. Beginning of the week, there was no language. By the end of the week, the governor signed the bill into law. And so they're going the wrong way. Colorado, they're facing all kinds of issues that are problematic. They keep trying in Arizona. Thankfully, Arizona's got a freedom perspective. Oregon and Washington, even in Idaho, there are anti-gun efforts that are born out of the successes that they've had here in the state of California. all of the red flag laws that they've got sponsored and popping up all over the country, they were created because of the passage of the gun violence restraining orders that were passed here in the state of California. So those of you who live in free America and don't want the virus to spread to their state, first of all, we need your prayers, but we can also use your support in order to fight here in the state. And it might not be in the legislature, but it will be in the courts. And if we defeat these efforts in the courts, it will save the rest of America from being infected by these things. And it will allow us to win here in the state of California to overturn many of the laws that are on the books.
There really isn't a lot we can do in the legislature in the state of California at this point. And people think that that's the be-all and end-all of it because the anti-gunners have a supermajority in the legislature, and we have Gavin Nuisance, or Gavin Gruesome, or whatever you want to call the guy, as our new governor, who's arguably, I never thought it would be possible, worse than Moonbeam Brown. I never thought I'd miss Jerry Brown, but I'm starting to. Terrible. However, there are some cases, it looks like one at least, and maybe two, that are going to be heard by the Supreme Court that could change everything. And since I've got you here, Sam, can you tell us about those?
Absolutely. First of all, here in the state of California this year, we have 61 pieces of legislation that we're following in conjunction with the National Rifle Association, California Rifle and Pistol Association, Gun Owners of California, Firearms Policy Coalition. We will be dealing with a minimum of 61 laws here in the state of California this legislative session. Some of them are good, very few of them. Most of them infringe on our Second Amendment rights. Our victories, our big victories, are going to come out of the courts, as you pointed out, Joel. We've got the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association against the City of New York. That's a case that challenges the transportation of firearms. You can actually have a firearm registered in the City of New York, but you're not allowed to take it anywhere outside of the city. You are allowed, if you request a permit, to take it to a gun range within the city limits, but you couldn't take it to a gun range outside of the city limits. You couldn't take it to a competition outside of the city limits. You couldn't take it hunting outside of the city limits. You're not allowed to transfer it outside of the city limits. Well, that law was challenged, and the Supreme Court has accepted that case. That's a very important case, and I'll tell you why it's important, even though it's just about transportation in just a second. The second case is the New Jersey State Rifle and Pistol Association against Grewal. This is a case where it's assault weapons bans and all kinds of gobbledygooks, more of the mainstream type of a lawsuit that we are hoping. And we're thinking, well, if they accepted one, are they going to accept another? Well, the Supreme Court has expressed interest by asking the state of New Jersey to file a brief as to why they shouldn't take the case, which means that they are considering it. And that would be a very, very important case. It has to do with assault weapons and concealed carry and all kinds of wonderful things. And then the third case is the Kettler case, which is one that Gun Owners Foundation, our legal arm, is supporting, and it challenges the NFA, the National Firearms Act, which governs all of the suppressors and machine guns and short barrel rifles and shotguns and all of that. And that is the Supreme Court is being asked to consider that case too, saying that the NFA is a law that is out of date in that it is a tax. It is admittedly a tax. And there are multiple Supreme Court decisions that say that you cannot tax a constitutional right. So given the changes in law not having to do with guns, they now affect this case, and that's being challenged. Now, Joel, here's the important point. It really doesn't matter that much which case the Supreme Court takes and hears, because we believe that the Supreme Court has had it up to here with the ignoring that they've received from appellate courts and district courts where they have taken the directive in the Heller and the McDonald decisions, where Justice Scalia said that courts should not engage in these balancing tests in order to evaluate whether a law violates the Second Amendment, that they should be taking the text, the history, and the tradition of the words in the Second Amendment, and those should guide decisions having to do on Second Amendment rights. Justice Gorsuch echoed the same sentiment, and Justice Kavanaugh actually used those words in a decision that he wrote while he was in the D.C. Appellate Court, the more equal amongst equal of the courts of appeals on a Second Amendment case. If they rule that it has been wrong of any appellate courts to use balancing tests, and we mean, you hear about strict scrutiny and intermediate scrutiny and rational basis. Those are the traditional levels of scrutiny. Well, text, history, and tradition really ranks above all of those balancing tests, because it isn't a balancing test at all. It's balancing it against the meaning of the words, not the amount of government interest that is attached to the issue. And that is a beautiful thing. And we believe that the court has really had it up to here with being ignored by many of the other courts. And if they rule on that issue, it will give us the ability to turn around, to sue, to overturn many of the gun control laws that are on the books throughout America. And in California in particular, the vast majority of the laws, in my opinion, given the legal people that we have working on our side and that kind of a ruling from the Supreme Court, we will overturn the vast majority of the gun control laws in the state of California. And that's a beautiful thing.
So when you talk about strict scrutiny, that's really tough to overcome when you're trying to limit a constitutional right. In just doing some reading recently, it seems like the only constitutional right they apply this intermediate scrutiny and the balancing test to is the Second Amendment. Every other constitutional right they apply this high level of scrutiny to, but the Second Amendment, they seem to just look for ways to try to make up laws as they go. Are you saying that if the court comes back and says, no, we're mandating that you use a high level of scrutiny on every constitutional case about the Second Amendment, that all these, or a lot of these cases that have been decided at the lower levels of scrutiny could be wiped out?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, what will happen is the case will be remanded to those courts, and given the guidelines that they're given by the Supreme Court, they're going to have to rehear these cases. And if they do that, they're not going to be able to stand up, because admittedly, all of these justices, the appellate courts and the district court judges, they base their rulings on this high level of government interest on these issues. Well, government interest goes away when you take text, history, and tradition, which is above strict scrutiny, the laws that are being approved by courts wouldn't stand the level of strict scrutiny, and the court has the ability now to come down with a level of scrutiny even higher. That is the type of scrutiny that should be used on all constitutional rights, especially the Second Amendment. They seem to use it for First Amendment. That they allow the press to say virtually anything that they want, and it is very difficult to sue the press unless you can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that they were lying through their teeth and they knew it all along. And even then, they get away with a lot of that stuff. But if they use the same level of scrutiny that they use on the First Amendment, on the Second Amendment, we're going to have the opportunity, and there will be a big job on our part. It won't be automatic, but we will sue to overturn the assault weapons ban, the 10-day waiting period, concealed carry permit systems, and turn them into shall issue, constitutional carry, the so-called safe handgun list here in the state of California that allows Californians only to buy 700 different models of guns that have been on the books for 20 years now, and none of the thousands of other new handguns that have been developed that are safer, cheaper, a more accurate that are on the market, Californians will be able to buy those again. And micro stamping will go away. All of these crazy, harebrained laws that have been passed here in the state of California will be challenged, and I am confident that we will win in court. Once we poke that hole in their dam, they're not going to have a finger big enough to plug the dike, man. It's going to come down, and it's going to come down hard on the anti-gunner. So they have a decision to make. They can continue to go down the path they're going, in which case they will have to spend millions and millions of dollars to try to defend themselves in courts, or they can actually try to fight crime from the proper perspective, and that's crime control. What do you do to criminals? How do you go after, instead of creating these gun control issues that affect law-abiding citizens, ostensibly to prevent criminals from getting guns, who are never prevented by any law from getting anything that they want. So that's where we are, Joel. And I am very optimistic, but let me tell you, it's going to take a lot of work on our part.
Well, a lot of money, too. All right, so here's the other piece that I think you and I talked about at SHOT Show, and that is that, first of all, DOJ is doing all this horrible stuff. They're making criminals out of law-abiding citizens and then swooping down at their house and doing a knock and talk. So before we go any farther, let me share with you very quickly what a couple of these law enforcement agents have told me as far as advice is concerned. I meant to do it earlier and I forgot. If you look outside your window and there's a police officer knocking on your door, don't answer the door. Easy peasy. Don't answer the door. They'll eventually just go away. Secondly, if you do answer the door and then you realize there's a cop out there, shut up and close the door. And that's it. If they have a warrant, then by law you have to let them in. But as Sam alluded to earlier, half the time they're just flim-flamming their way in. They don't have a warrant. They couldn't get a warrant. And there's no way they can just come in the door unless you decide to give them information or talk to them. All right, here's the other thing. First and foremost, you cannot talk your way out of going to jail, but you can very easily talk your way into going. So be quiet. Secondly, don't let them in your house. Don't keep things within the view of your windows or whatever, because that's the plain view rule. If an officer looks through the window and sees a violation, or they look through your screen door and they see a violation, or you let them walk in the door and they're walking around, they see a violation, and it's in plain view, they get to investigate that, even though they never had a legal right to come in your house in the first place until you let them. So that's big deal. All right. I went back years ago before the assault weapons registration, and I said, don't register your firearms. Make them featureless or whatever if you're in California, because if you register it, you're setting yourself up for a fall. And now we're seeing that I was right about predicting that. So I'm just going to tell you right now, if they're coming to your door, don't answer the door. Take your AR-15s. If they're at the door, don't answer the door. Go get in your safe, take your AR-15, take the upper off the lower, and set it down there. Then if they have a search warrant and they come in, you don't have anything illegal because it's not a functioning firearm. Now, that may change in the future, but as of this moment, it's not determined what it is because the lower is not attached to an upper. You can even store them that way. I have an AR. I store it that way. It's in the safe with it separated, because that way if they come to the door, they want to look at it, and I have a warrant, and there's nothing they're going to find wrong with it in case I made some sort of stupid little procedural error in making it featureless and I don't realize it. It's not a functional firearm. So there's some advice for you. All right. In addition to courts, just to kind of buoy your spirits a little bit, we have 58 constitutional officers in this state. They're the county sheriffs. Sam, my understanding is 40-some odd of those, I think 48 of them, have or are going to go to some sort of meeting to talk about concealed carry and other things in the state. And they seem to be leaning more along the lines of issuing more and more along the lines of looking at some of these unconstitutional laws and deciding whether they will even enforce them in their counties. Am I wrong about that?
No, actually, it's already happened. Last week, there was a conference of California concealed weapons permit administrators, the people who actually administrate the CCW programs for sheriffs and chiefs of police throughout the state of California. There were over 100 people who attended this conference. Some of them were instructors, actually CCW instructors. Some of them were vendors, and most of them were the CCW administrators. They wanted to, for the first time, Joel, I was so excited. This was good government at its best. staff people getting together, trying to learn from other organizations to see what works best to streamline the process, to make it more efficient, to be able to operate with fewer resources and fewer personnel and still get the job done. They're taking advantage of new technologies. The perspective amongst the people there was very positive. I was very encouraged. And there's even conversation amongst some of them saying, hey, you know, if we were a constitutional carry law a state, we wouldn't have to deal with any of these things. And let me tell you what one of the conversations was. Yeah, well, we wouldn't be able to do background checks on people who are getting CCWs. And one of the other administrators said, well, you know what? The fact of the matter is, in states that have become constitutional carry, that hasn't been an issue. They haven't had more crimes. They haven't had arrested more people for carrying concealed illegally or anything like that. They're concentrating on crime control. So maybe that's not an issue in the state of California either. Law-abiding citizens will carry, and the criminals who will carry are already carrying right now.
Duh.
So it was.
They're already carrying. Hello.
They're criminals.
Jeez,
Yeah.
That's why they're called criminals.
It was a very positive meeting. And I think that the vast majority in the state of California, we still have some holdout counties like San Francisco and Los Angeles, a few other Bay Area counties that continue to make it very difficult for law-abiding citizens to avail themselves of a CCW. But for the vast majority of the state of California, most of the sheriffs are doing what they can to make it simpler and in a more efficient manner, allow people to get CCWs, because they're the first to tell you, hey, my CCW people are the people I can count on. They are the law-abiding people in my county, and I love them, and they love us. And those are not the people we need to be worried about. So how do we make it easier on them and make it easier on us? And that was a big part of the conference. So it was beautiful.
I was very encouraged to hear that representatives from the San Diego County Sheriff's Department attended.
Absolutely.
I knew that, or I didn't know they had attended because I didn't know it had happened yet, but my understanding was that they were planning to attend, so I'm very encouraged by that. Now, look, Sam and I agree on this, and I know you do too, that a concealed carry permit is nothing but a way for the government to give you permission to exercise a constitutionally protected right. You shouldn't need
Absolutely.
a permit to exercise your constitutionally protected right. I get that. Sam gets it. We agree. But here's the deal. In California, these things are incremental. We're going to get rid of them incrementally, and we understand that. So anytime I see the needle move in the right direction, even though it's not completely over where I'd like it to be, if it's moving in the right direction, then I feel encouraged about that. A couple of things real quick. If you're not a member of Gun Owners of California, please join. There is a link in the description. I am a member, and once in a while I contribute additional money. Please join, because Sam does a phenomenal job. And all of this stuff that they do, unfortunately, it takes money. And, funds are limited, and Bloomberg and those other people, they don't have limited funds, and they throw money at this all the time. So in order to do amicus briefs and fight these things in court and get these things done, we need to do that. I think the other thing is, I would encourage you to inform yourself. And you can do that here. You can do it on the Gun Owners of California website. Stay informed as to what's going on, because I saw a comment earlier about your calm approach to this. And one of the reasons I think Sam can remain calm, and people comment about the fact that I don't get angry that often, is because I stay informed. So I see not only the negative of DOJ doing this kind of stuff, I also see the places where we're starting to get victories. If you don't see any of the victories, all you see is the defeats, and that can be incredibly frustrating and incredibly discouraging. And the next thing you know, you're so angry, it's beyond belief. Mm-hmm. I understand the anger, but I also understand we need to apply the frustration or the desire to make a change in the right places at the right way. So please, please, please make sure that you're informed. There are multiple ways to do that. Certainly, Gun Owners of California's website is one of them. Their Facebook page is another one. You're welcome to watch here. You can check out our Facebook and Twitter page where I post things on a regular basis. That's why we're doing this, is so that you will know what's going on, so that you and Sam and I and the rest of us can kind of help each other out, and we can fight the fight, and we can figure out, we're not going to succeed in the legislature, but we can succeed in the courts. We're succeeding with
48 out of the 58 sheriffs in the county or in the state, these are constitutional officers. They're run for election, and it's easier to replace a sheriff than it is an assembly member or a senator or a governor. Mayors, same way. City councils, same way. If you live in a smaller town, find out what's going on with your city council, find out what's going on with your mayor, make sure you're electing pro-Second Amendment conservative people. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Sam?
Well, Joel, you again, you're really good you're a carpenter, man. You hit the nail on the head all the time. We do this, and one of the reasons that I stay calm, and people always ask, how can you do this without going crazy? We do it, and Joel does what he does and spreads the word so that we are armed and informed, and because it saves lives. We do not compromise on the Second Amendment, as Joel said. We do not believe in compromise. We believe that constitutional carry is and should be the law of the land. That is what our founding fathers intended, and that is what we are working towards. But right now we are saddled with a CCW program in the state of California. And the fact of the matter is, because we have tens of thousands and probably over 100,000 CCW holders in the state of California, lives are being saved. And that is a very good goal to have. And that keeps us charged and going in what we're doing. Because people are lawful carriers of guns, and they would be lawful under constitutional carry laws, lives are being saved.
I agree.
We're all about saving lives, man. Law-abiding citizens saving their lives. Because when you need a law enforcement officer in your back pocket, they are 5 minutes away, and anybody will tell you that a gunfight happens in under a minute.
I got a lot of friends who are cops. I can't fit any of them in my back pocket. But I take a gun with me everywhere I go because I'm one of those few people in the state of California that's allowed to. And it needs to be constitutional carry at some point, and that's what we're aiming at. Sam, is there anything that I have not asked you that you want to address, something new or something that we're unaware of going on with the state?
Joel, you pretty much covered everything, and there will be more details coming out as the legislature does some outrageous things throughout this year and throughout their session that we need to talk about to give us more information so that we can fight back intelligently. Now, your folks, the fact that they're listening to you points out that they are smart folks. They're intelligent folks who are trying to consume good information, whether it's about guns or accessories or the laws or personal protection or any of that. That is a beautiful thing. That is us. Now, all of your folks should be taking this link to this video and sending it out to as many people as they can, whether they're in the state of California or outside. We will email this information to all of our folks and say, hey, watch it and send it out to everybody you know, because our folks need to be armed and informed. And the more we are armed and informed, the better we're going to be able to fight. What we don't need is people who don't know the laws, don't know the process, to go before the media and make a fool of themselves, and that taints the entire pro-gun community. So know the laws. The information is available to you through GunGuyTV, through Gun Owners of California, through a bunch of different resources. And it's our responsibility, we as patriots, to preserve this country and this state by being armed and informed.
Sam, let me before I let you go, let me scan through these real quick, see if there's a question or comment that comes up. One I see here: why don't you run for re-election? Why don't you run for a public office and change the laws in your state? Well, I don't know if you're directing that at me or Sam, but he and I are both working our tails off at this. So if you're in California or whatever state you're in, I would ask you the same question. Why don't you run for public office and change the laws in your state? That would be great. I'll tell you what, let us know who you are and that you're running and you're pro-Second Amendment, and we'll try to get the word out for you.
That's exactly right. Joel, you and I are dedicated to the Second Amendment. That's where our focus is. When you are one of 120 elected assemblymen or senators, you have to worry about, water and forestry and roads and all kinds of other stuff. And you're one of 120. Here, we can move hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people in the state of California to affect the legislature. And that's far more important than being elected to the office. That would be a dirty, rotten job that I don't want on anybody. But anybody who wants to do that job, I will do everything I can to help them if they believe in the Second Amendment.
All right. One question is here that goes back to the DOJ confiscating things in the video that we were
Yes.
talking about before. Why did the DOJ confiscate them? Isn't it the job of the ATF to regulate and confiscate firearms?
The ATF is there to confiscate firearms that violate federal law. DOJ confiscate firearms that violate state law. And you can bet your sweet pippy that there are a lot of ATF agents that are out there going, boy, you knuckleheads, we feel sorry about the job you have to do in the state of California because, we don't have to do this in any other state, and we don't have any of the problems that you guys are talking about. And we're not putting our lives in danger like you guys are every time you go and do one of these knock and talks or try to bully your way into some household to investigate a potential violation of state law. So, the ATF, feds, DOJ, state laws.
All right, let me see if I can find another one for you, Sam. Hang on one second, and I think I'm almost to the end of them. Pardon me if you're watching. And by the way, if you're still with us, you're obviously pro Second Amendment, and you're still watching this. And we've been at it for almost about 50 minutes or something. We'll wrap up here in just a second. I just want to make sure if there's any key questions here that we cover them. I see a lot of comments, not a whole lot of questions here, and I'm almost to the bottom. Let's see. What about the bill being proposed to turn ARs and AKs into NFA items? I'm not aware of that. Sam, are you aware of a bill for that?
There's a federal bill that's been sponsored in the House by some whack job left wing Democrat.
Tell us how you really feel about that guy.
That they want to define all semi-automatics as assault weapons, It may get a little bit of traction in the House, but there is more of a chance that a snowman will last for more than 10 seconds in hell of that passing through the Senate, and the president would veto any sort of legislation like that would make it to his desk. But yes, that is a perspective that they have in Congress. There are people who want to redefine all firearms and say that all semi-automatics, handguns, rifles, and shotguns are assault weapons and should be banned.
Okay, one question here. As Californians, Sam, what can we do to push the DOJ to change this policy?
Well, first of all, make your voices known. As you pointed out, go to the Department of Justice website, go to their information, contact information, send them an email, make a phone call, let them know how you feel. Be polite, be articulate, and be to the point. Let them know what it is that you are objecting to. And then get involved with Gun Owners of California, or NRA or CRPA, or any of the other groups that are involved in elections. Those of us, and we took a drubbing this last year. But if we're involved in elections, we're involved in replacing the people that are there with people who have our perspective, and they will have an influence on the Department of Justice that will be very impactful. So it's a long process. It's not going to happen overnight. It takes a lot of dedicated work. It took us since 1989 to get to the position that we are in here in the state of California, and we're not going to turn it around overnight unless the court gives us a hand and we have a case that will truncate the process quite a bit.
Sam, a number of people kind of taking the NRA to task here. One guy says, take the NRA stickers off your house or car. These are folks who have some issues with the NRA. Do you have any comments about that? You're with a different organization. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I have some very experienced and heartfelt comments. Here in the state of California, which is where I work, and I dedicate my life to fighting for the Second Amendment, the National Rifle Association has done stellar work over the last 3 or 4 years. They have spent probably close to $5 million in the lawsuits that we are talking about that are going to make their way through the process and be the building blocks for us to overturn many of the on the books in the state of California. So as a founder, even our founder and chairman, Senator H.L. Richardson, he was a board member of the National Rifle Association and recommends that everybody should be a member of the NRA. And if you have an issue with the NRA, if you're on the outside and you criticize, nobody listens. They don't listen. But if you're a member and you have comments or criticisms about what they're doing, that makes a difference. Then you are working towards change and not just barking at a closed door. So I'm telling you, here in the state of California, the team of Gun Owners of California, NRA, CRPA, Firearms Policy Coalition is a strong, dedicated, very no compromise pro-Second Amendment coalition that we are working with. So if you want to be critical, but you can't be critical here in the state of California. And I'm here to tell you that as a fact.
This is then we're going to wrap up here. I did scan through the rest of them. I didn't see any that we hadn't pretty much already covered. There were some other questions, but they kind of covered the same ground. This is a very, very tough fight in states like California. And California, by the way, is not the only one. And surprisingly, if you live in another state that's free, you might be surprised to know that California does not have the strictest gun laws in the country. There are other states which are actually worse, if that can actually be. For example, you don't have to have a license in the state of California to own a firearm. There are states where you have to have a license to own a firearm, and that's not the case here. So it's not quite as bad in California as it is in other states, but it's pretty bad, and it takes a lot of fighting in these states to do that. So I want to encourage you, if you're in a free state, support Gun Owners of California. Join. Okay, so you live in Alabama or whatever. I get it, but would you like California policies to come to Alabama or to a zip code near you? Probably not. If that's the case, then help out in these states. New Jersey, New York, Illinois has a really horrible laws up there. I mean, Cal from Optics Planet. Optics Planet is in Illinois, and Cal lives there, and it drives him nuts. So I get it. I mean, if that's the case, then support these states and the local state organizations that are fighting the battle in the states where you don't want to visit and you don't want to live, and you would prefer that everybody doesn't move into your state and jack it up too. Mm-hmm. Rather than getting on social media and giving us all grief, I can't tell you how many people, I get these comments all the time. Well, why don't you do something about your state? I am. Mm-hmm. If that's you and you're looking at me right now, I am. So is the man you see on the screen next to me. If you want to help us in the state, then get up off your wallet and join Gun Owners of California. It'll help quite a bit. And even if you don't want to do that, you haven't got a penny to put in it, at least send something encouraging. Lift us up and say, hey, guys, fight the fight. Stay with it. Because that's what we need. We need our brothers in the Second Amendment, sisters in the Second Amendment, to come together as a Second Amendment family. Let's help each other out. Let's encourage each other. Now, one thing I want to mention real quick before I let Sam go. If you're new to the channel, you may not be aware of the fact that as a Christian, I want this channel to be family friendly. So I do not swear on the channel. Sam knows I don't allow it, even in interviews or whatever. I also don't allow it in the comments. So there's already an established filter filtering out the comments. So if you want to make a comment, I'm getting a lot of comments with F-bombs in it. The filter will take them out automatically and your comment isn't viewed. You may not like that. I get it. But I have a lot of people who watch this channel specifically because they can watch it with their kids and not worry about that kind of stuff in there. And that's one of the reasons I do it. So please keep the swear words out of your comments, and then your comment will appear. I want to hear your point of view, and I'm sure others do as well, but let's moderate ourselves a little bit. So if somebody's watching the channel with their 5-year-old or their 10-year-old or whatever, they don't want to expose their kid to that. Let's make sure that we're being a little bit more moderate about our language, and that way your comment will show up. Sam, is there anything else that you want to add before we go?
Joel, I think we've covered the universe here, and
whether we like it or not.
Yeah. We need to be encouraged. Don't go away depressed. We have some great opportunities that are before us, and they're imminent. But you have to stay engaged. You have to be armed and informed. You have to be a member of Gun Owners of California. You can go to our website, gunownersca.com, Google Gun Owners of California, Google my name.
There's actually a link in the description of this, I think.
Super.
Directly to that website. And I'll make sure there's a link there, if there isn't one already, to the California Attorney General's office. So you can call and tie up their, if you're in California, call and tie up the Attorney General's phones. Just do it tomorrow. If you got time.
Your tax dollars pay for their phone lines anyway, so why not use them?
Burn them up and drive them crazy and let them know that you're sick of this DOJ stuff and you're sick of this nonsense, and they need to have at least some due process where people can get this stuff resolved without finding themselves in jail. So if that link is not already there, I'll make sure it is there as soon as we're done. Sam,
let's keep this going, because until the last life is saved, we've got a job to do. And and it may be our lives.
Sam, thank you very much. Have a wonderful week. I really appreciate your time. And thank you very much for watching. Have a great week wherever you go, whatever you do. If you're in California even, make sure that you stay in the fight, stay informed. Like Sam says, stay armed and informed, and please be safe.